this wasn't the first time the apostles were arguing about who was the greatest, and I don't think it would be the last time either. But this time it took place during the Last Supper. You imagine our Lord thinking, oh my goodness, I'm about to die. Worked for 3 years for this, and they still don't get it. And Jesus made a real point that night by showing that the greatest has to be the servant of all. He got down on his hands and his knees and washed the feet of the disciples. So this gospel passage fits in very well with today's Saints' Day, St. Gregory the Great, because he is the Pope who came up with the phrase for his office, Servus Servorum Dei, the servant of the servants of God. Another title for the Pope is the Roman Pontifex or Summus Pontifex. There are a number of titles, but this is the preferred one, the servant of the servants of God. So today, September 3rd, the Church remembers St. Gregory the Great. He was the Pope from the year 590 A.D. to 604 A.D. And how many popes do you know who have the title the Great? I was thinking, well, there's Gregory the Great, there's Leo the Great. A lot of us call John Paul the Great. Is there anybody else? There was one other. He was St. Nicholas the Great, but evidently he wasn't so great because people don't remember him, right? But Leo the Great lived in 440 to 461 AD, towards the end of the Roman Empire. And Gregory the Great was now at the end of the Roman Empire, the beginning of the Gothic kingdoms, early Middle Ages, which would be known as the Dark Ages, because much learning was lost and many civil institutions were lost. There was political chaos throughout what is known as Europe. And that can happen again. People can lose knowledge and systems can fall apart. We're very blessed with what we have right now. So Gregory the Great came from a privileged family. He was wealthy. He was well educated. And at some point in life, he decided he was going to live as a Benedictine monk. And he turned his own house into a monastery, and he founded other monasteries. And before you know it, he became ordained as a priest, and they elected him pope. And he was moved one day in the Roman Forum when he saw young men from England being sold as slaves. For us, it's kind of odd for us to think as English are being sold as slaves, because 1,000 years later, you've got people from Africa being sold by slaves by the English. But back then, they were being sold as slaves in the Roman Forum because the Romans had conquered all that part of the world. And that's when Gregory the Great had this famous statement, Non Angli sed Angeli. They're not Anglicans, they're angels. See, foreign Christianity, they'd be angels if they were Christians. And so then he deputized people to go be missionaries to England. That's how the Catholic and Christian faith started in England and in Ireland and in the northern parts of Europe. When he died, he was acclaimed pope immediately by the people. It's called popular acclamation. They didn't have to go through a beatification process or a canonization process because his fame of sanctity was so well known. They declared him a saint. So what do we have today in the church from St. Gregory the Great? The Our Father at Mass. Before he was a pope, the Our Father was not in the Mass. He placed it right between the Eucharistic prayer and the communion rite. That's from him. The Kyrie, which we sung today, he placed it in there in Greek because the Greek language had such an important part on the Roman Empire. And that's why today the music we can sing in a solemn Mass is known as Gregorian chant, because Gregorian chant are the parts of the Mass, right? So the Gloria, the Kyrie, the Sanctus, the Pater Noster. That's why today when I sang the Alleluia, it's the closest Alleluia I know of from that ancient time, the 800s, right? That's a very simple, plain chant. It's wonderful that we can keep this alive today. He was also known as being very, very generous to the poor. He didn't start the first Catholic Charities, at least with that name, but that's what he did. And so from the gospel message today, we are inspired to follow the example of our Lord, the Last Supper, and of Gregory the Great to be the servant of the other servants of God. And what does it mean to serve? I think there's a phrase that if we get accustomed to it, will help us to become servants. It's 3 words. You know, I like 2-word job descriptions. This one is a 3-word. Please you first. Please, you first. At the grocery store, please, you first. All right? Or at the restaurant, or at the airport, or in traffic on the Eden's Expressway. Please, you first. You don't actually say it out loud, but you let them go ahead because they're in a rush, right? And they cut you off. And okay, God bless them. They must be on the way to the emergency room because his wife's going to have a baby. That must be why he's driving so fast with his Tesla in traffic on the Eden's Expressway. So that is the disposition we want to have. Please, you first. At the store, in traffic, at the airport. And it comes down to this phrase, courtesy to all comers. It's a great Christian phrase, something we can be inspired to do. That line is actually owed to Father Leo Tracy in his book, Vessels of Clay. But it kind of really describes our Christian attitude in public. Courtesy to all